Well, hello everybody. My name's Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses. An extremely warm welcome if you're joining me for the first time in my musings/wafflings, and welcome back if you have suffered this experience before. Anyway, so it is, what month is it? March. Yeah, it's March. And I have been busy, as many of you will know, reading through the fantastic books on the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction long list, and now my days are ready for free reading again, although I have 5 of the women's short fiction long listed books, I'll get my words out in a minute, over there on the table waiting for me, which I'm really keen to get to. But in between, I've had what I would call a palate cleanser, and it's turned out to be my book of the month if I set aside the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction list. So maybe maybe I would describe it as my fiction book of the month. But it's a book that I've read because I've had it on my shelves since 2017, 2018, something like that, quite a long time, although not as long as many of the books that are loitering on the shelves in here. And I don't know why I haven't got around to reading it before. I think perhaps because there have been so many retellings of classical myths over the last, I don't know how many years. And actually this was kind of almost in the first wave, this book, I would describe it as. And I think maybe I got a bit super saturated, and I had an instinct that this was going to be good and wanted to sort of really savour it at a moment when I hadn't done any classical reading for a while. It also just happened to fit the February prompt for Savage Reads Prompts, or Savage Prompts 2024, which you can find on Storygraph if you're interested in reading along. And because of my other reading, I'd got a little bit behind with the prompts, so I thought, oh gosh, that's really convenient. This book will actually fit in with that prompt as well. So the book is Colm Toibin's House of Names. I absolutely love the cover of this book, for starters. There's something about it. There's a sense of isolation, there's the silhouettes, there's the simplicity of it that really attracted me, probably as well as the fact that it's the retelling of a Greek myth. And I am now desperate, having read this book, to read some more of Colm Toibin's books, because this is the first one that I've read, to my shame, and I really feel like I want to explore his fiction in a lot more detail, particularly because he's a male writer. He's Irish, and I love, Irish writing often is so lyrical and so beautiful. They have the gift of the gab, the Irish. I think oral storytelling is so much part of their culture, and I usually really enjoy Irish literature anyway, but this book particularly really got me. And I think I was just about to say, actually, that what he seems to do, from what I've gathered, is he often has women at the centre of his stories. He often explores female experience, female perspective, and I love that idea. I love the idea of a male climbing into trying to understand a female perspective. And so this book is the story of Clytemnestra and her family, her children. And Clytemnestra was a queen. She was married to Agamemnon. She was persuaded by Agamemnon to send her daughter to go to marry Achilles, who was the greatest Greek fighter in the war against Troy. And this is all prior to the Trojan War. So the war hasn't happened yet. And Agamemnon has gathered this huge force of Greek strength on the coast of Greece at a place called Aulis. And they're all ready to go to Troy to get Helen back, because the upstart Paris has had the audacity to come and take Helen. Whether he raped her, whether she went off willingly, whether it was all the whim of the gods. There are lots of different versions. Anyway, Agamemnon is thoroughly embarrassed. He can't set sail because there's no wind. And so, of course, what does he do? He consults the priest. The priest says that they will only get wind at Aulis if he sacrifices his daughter. And this story is played out in classical literature. So, for example, the Greek playwright Euripides, he wrote a play called Iphigenia at Aulis, which explores this very question. But there are also lots of other Greek plays that cover this story. So you've got Aeschylus Oresteia, and you've got Sophocles Electra. So it's quite the story's sort of really quite well documented, I suppose, for the literature of its time. And a lot of these characters pop up in things like Homer and so on. So they are it's one of the Greek myth cycles that kind of recurs. And I think the appeal of this is so strong. I mean, it's such a powerful story anyway. You know, this idea of a woman being deceived and taking her daughter to what is meant innocently as a wedding, you know, the handing over of her daughter to another man, and her husband has tricked her, and the young girl is actually going to be sacrificed for the sake of the army, for the sake of the greater good, as it were. And off, you know, as soon as the sacrifice occurs, the wind arises, they sail to Troy, and they're gone for 10 years. Now, during that 10 years, Clytemnestra does a lot of thinking. And she also picks up a lover called Aegisthus. And she has a daughter, Electra, who was left behind when they travelled to Aulis for what turned out to be the sacrifice. And she has a son, Orestes, who is duty bound in sort of classical law to avenge the death of his father. So that leaves him in a very difficult situation. And one of the things I love about this version is that Orestes doesn't have much agency. He's a very young child when it happens. He's much more interested in sword fighting than anything else. He doesn't necessarily totally understand what he sees at Aulis, because he does witness the sacrifice, and he's very much a sort of listener. He's an onlooker in his own story, and Colm Toibin takes this fantastic gap in Greek mythology, and that Orestes does avenge his father eventually, but it's not necessarily something that he plots and schemes towards. And he disappears. He disappears for years out of mythology. And what Colm Toibin does is he plugs the gap. He takes the story and he explores what Orestes was doing during that time. And I think, you know, that he's done it so beautifully. And he starts with Clytemnestra. He starts with her voice, and he writes it in the first person, and she is back at home and she's reflecting on what's happened and, you know, the whole experience. And her voice is so kind of cold, poetic, spare, and I found that really it fit kind of with the Clytemnestra, particularly from the Oresteia, as I understand her, but it also fit with the situation, because what the novel is really exploring is timeless. It's the pressure of civil war, it's the pressure of war, it's what happens when society is put under pressure because of the actions of the people in power. It's about what happens when a civilization is beginning to question the existence of its gods. And there are all these vacuums that kind of are created and need filling, and it leads to the most appalling, violent behavior. Nobody trusts anybody else. The palace is overrun by guards. Some of the guards are on one side or another or another or another. There are all these factions that are building in this society because there's this huge power vacuum. And I think Colm Toibin clearly was influenced by the events that happened in Northern Ireland. I mean, he's Southern Irish, I think, pretty sure he is. And he was a journalist, and he was reporting on a lot of the awful incidents that happened years ago in Ireland, and still continue to this day, the tension. And I think this book is filled with his experience. He's writing about something that happened in a mythical past, but he's injecting it with the feelings and the experiences of the people that he witnessed suffering around him during that time, and particularly, you know, the way that he describes the aftermath of certain violent events in here is really moving. And I think this book has had even more resonance with me this week because, of course, of what's happening in Gaza and Israel. And, you know, a lot of the experiences, the people living in the rural areas around the city, around where the palaces are, and a little bit further beyond, you know, their lives are so harsh. They're starving, they're struggling, nobody trusts anyone else. They've got guard dogs. They won't, you know, they won't harbour anyone. They won't, nobody can sort of go to safety to anywhere. There are no safe harbours because nobody trusts anyone else. So I found this book profoundly interesting and profoundly moving, and really just the sweep of it. And so he, you know, he starts with Clytemnestra's voice, but then he switches to Orestes, but writes in the third person. And I found that fascinating as well. So we get various voices pop up, all the female voices, I think I'm right in saying, because Electra appears as well. They all are written in the first person, whereas Orestes isn't. And again, I think that's you know, I'm really intrigued to know that's something to do with Colm Toibin thinking about the female perspective. And of course, it's much easier to empathize with a character, I think, if it's written in the first person. So he's doing something there. I think he's saying something about the women, and the women are tough in a way that maybe Orestes isn't. So yeah, I need to shut up now because I could actually talk about this book all day, I think, if I was allowed to. For me, it's one of the most impressive retellings of Greek myth that I've read. I think it gets to the sort of the primeval, which is something that I love mythology for. And I think when somebody writes about it in that way and looks at our basic instincts and our basic behavior as human, it does something really, really extraordinary. So yeah, I'm excited. Next time I'm in a bookshop, I think I'm going to be searching out Colm Toibin's other fiction. Anyway, hope you found that useful. If you've read it, please let me know. Comments down below, that would be brilliant. If you are planning on reading it or you go away and read it, please also let me know how you get on with it. And also if you've read any of his other books, I'd be really excited to know whether they are as astonishingly brilliant as this one. It gets some really good recommendation. Mary Beard describes it as unforgettable on here, and Edith Hall, who is one of my favourite classicists, Professor Edith Hall, I might add, she describes it as a masterpiece. So I don't think you can go far wrong with that. And Natalie Haynes is credited at the back as well, I think. So, you know, it's a real classics fest. There we go. Anyway, I'm going to stop now. It really is amusing, waffling, rambling thing. Take care. Bye.